To go further in depth, we're joined by Alina Hernandez, a longtime journalist in South Florida who was part of the historic opening of the first news bureau in Havana back in 2001 while working for the Tribune Company. She's currently an online managing editor for our parent website, Newsmax.com. Alina, you were nice enough to come on at the conclusion of yesterday's show with the developing news. Here you are back this morning. You've had a night to sleep on it, almost a day for it to sink in. Is your reaction pretty much the same, or what else have you thought about in the wake of this news?
Well, I think that I was thinking of all the years growing up as a kid that our parents would say, maybe this year we'll have Christmas in Havana. So I think that that could maybe come true by next Christmas, and that could be a really good thing. But I think, like many Cubans, I'm cautiously optimistic. I'm concerned, that we may not get significant human rights changes on the island. I think we all are excited that we'll be able to travel there, perhaps with less red tape. But what about things like giving the Cuban people free access to the internet, open media? It would be great if the children of the island were not indoctrinated into communist values. Those are the things that I think are going to be crucial for this administration to change, and very quickly. I don't think that the Cuban American community here in the States is going to tolerate a free pass for the Castro brothers.
And speaking of that, concern about that, yesterday in Miami, the reaction, a lot of people said this was a betrayal of the free Cubans and ultimately a betrayal of the Cuban people still imprisoned there, as they put it. What would you say to those folks?
I would say to them that it's time for change, that this is going to benefit the majority of the Cuban people. I hope, and I think it's going to benefit Cuban Americans here, because we've been separated from our culture, our families, for over 50 years. So I think overall it's going to be a good thing. But I would encourage them to keep the pressure on the administration. It's not okay to indoctrinate the children of the island. It's not okay to keep political prisoners for the simple reasons that they voiced opposition to the current sitting government.
Another Cuban American, Senator Bob Menendez, outgoing chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, has some real suspicions. Here's what he said yesterday to Fox News.
I think the president's actions have created a challenge for us globally. There is no equivalence between an international aid worker and convicted spies who were found guilty of conspiracy to commit espionage against the United States. It's a fallacy to believe that Cuba will reform because an American president opens his hands and the Castro brothers will suddenly unclench their fists.
Alina, you hear Bob Menendez right there. He's saying that actually this is rewarding tyranny.
Well, I think that we have been punishing the regime for over 50 years, and it hasn't worked. I believe that it's time now for some diplomacy. I think that our position with the embargo has been, quite frankly, the time has come for change. I don't think that it's really helped the Cuban people at all. It certainly didn't help the people, the Cuban Americans living in Miami. I think that it's time for a change. So we have to make the first step to issue an olive branch and see where that goes. This doesn't have to be an end game.
Understood. But speaking of an end game, you say it's time for change. I have to say it's time for a break because of television and the time constraints. Alina, stay right there. We're going to continue the conversation on the other side of the break. Talk about, I guess, in essence, your long-lost cousins, who you and family members perhaps have not seen in a half century, and what is next internationally. More with our friend Alina as America's Forum continues here on Newsmax TV. Let's continue our conversation, rejoined by Alina Hernandez. Alina, as we mentioned earlier, part of a team that opened the first American news bureau in Havana in 2001, currently an online managing editor for our parent website, Newsmax.com. Alina, the president touched on this briefly. Here's the concern that many of us have. Father Time would take the course and Fidel and Raul Castro go the way of all flesh, probably sooner rather than later. To say that we're, quote, embracing the future by letting those guys hang on to power with their brutal, repressive regime, how does it really help the Cuban people?
Well, I think that when you have a more open society, when you have more access to people from other countries that will be coming there, when you have more access to American goods, more access to the American people, Cubans are eager for change. They're not particularly enamored with the Castro brothers. So I believe that this will be the spark that will empower the Cuban people to take matters into their own hands and to decide their politics and to decide what kind of government they want. I don't think it's going to happen overnight. I don't think that the embargo was successful in removing the Castro brothers or, quite frankly, the cronies that they put into power. But I think that kind of change is going to have to come from the Cuban people. I think what the president has done is provided perhaps that catalyst to help them make decisions about their own future.
Alina, as we were following the news narrative, the developing story began with the announcement that American contractor Alan Gross was freed for what were called humanitarian reasons. Then we find out that both sides swapped spies, including a high-value U.S. agent. But a whole lot of folks, including another Cuban American, the junior senator from Florida, Marco Rubio, say we didn't get enough in return from the Cuban government to strike this type of diplomatic deal. Let's take a listen to Marco Rubio.
Did they agree to freedom of press? No. Did they agree to free and unfettered access to the internet? No. Did they agree to elections? Absolutely not. Did they agree to independent political parties? No. Did they agree to freedom of assembly? No. What democratic opening are we getting here? None whatsoever. And so that's why I've said this president has to be the worst negotiator we've ever had. And he has betrayed those Cubans that have worked so hard and have sacrificed so much for the freedom and liberty of the island.
Alina, what would you say in response to Senator Rubio?
I share some of his concerns. I absolutely share the concerns about, open freedoms. I share the concern about, I'm not quite sure what we got in return in terms of, this secretive spy that we don't know anything about. However, what they did agree to was engagement. I think the policy of sanctions and lack of engagement has not worked. So I'm optimistic that the Cubans have agreed to engagement with the U.S. Government and with the Obama administration. I am cautiously optimistic that will benefit the Cuban people.
Alina, it's not my intent to put you on the spot, but you deal basically with the written word, albeit with internet journalism that can change by the nanosecond. Given the events of the last day, if you had to come up with a headline that not only reflects the news, but quite frankly, your interpretation of what is happening, could you give us the headline you would formulate about this entire story and all its implications?
I would say Cuba's second chance. Cuba gets a second chance.
Cuba's second chance. Well, that's certainly one way to put it, and something that we will continue to monitor because a lot remains to be done. Will Congress go along with the president, or is this a political splash that offers a lot of great hope and perhaps to see it dashed? We're going to stay in touch with you. We appreciate your good work at our parent website, Newsmax.com. We'll stay in touch and monitor this and get your reaction as events warrant. Fair enough?
Fair enough. Thank you, JD.
Alina Hernandez checking in via Skype with her thoughts as a Cuban American on what is transpiring in terms of a diplomatic initiative. Coming up, we take a look not only at Cuba, but at Russia. Vladimir Putin with his end-of-the-year press conference. He doesn't like the economic sanctions, but he's trying to get economic reforms, he claims, in Russia. Steve Forbes will be here to talk about it.